As I get started making the videos for the Petty School Reading course in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, I wanted to take a minute and make a quick video for parents who are working with students, trying to get little ones to read and write, because I'd like to explain to you what we're doing in this Petty School Reading course, because for parents in America, where we just have this sort of modern idea of phonics lessons and things like that, what I'm doing may seem kind of backwards, and so I'd like to explain it so you understand what's going on and you can relax and just concentrate on helping the children to learn each lesson as they move forward. The problem with the English language is that as much as we want to get our kids started reading and writing and make up phonics rules for them and things like that, the problem is that the English language is not a phonetic language. And so we can make up fake rules and teach our kids these rules to try to get them started just so we feel good because our 4-year-old is starting to, read some fake phonics books or something like that. But really, if we don't deal with the English language for what it actually is, we're just giving our kids fake lessons. And while they may make some apparent fake progress in their early years of schooling, they're going to run into a wall when it comes time to actually deal with the complexity of the English language. So in Petty School Reading, what I'm doing is taking something that's actually very complex, which is the history and the development of the English language as it comes from a number of different sources into modern English. And I'm basically leading the children through it as it developed historically. So we're going to go back and start with the sounds of classical Latin, and then we're going to learn the sounds of ecclesiastical Latin. Then we're going to pick up some of the Old and Middle English sounds that come together. And finally, at the end of the course, have the kids able to read and write any syllable that they ever encounter in the English language. That's the only way to really lead our children to a mastery of English reading and writing. So it may sound a little weird, it may seem a little weird when we get started because they're looking at this letter and being told it represents the sound E, and they're not just being taught the short I sound or the long English I sound, but we're going to get to that. But we have to present it to the kids in a way that's both simple and true. Okay, we don't want to create artificial fake lessons because ultimately those simple lessons end up being the cause of the confusion in the kids. Because what happens, put yourself in the shoes of the child. The child, because the parents or the teachers want to make things appear simple to the child is being told that everything is simple. And that this sound, for example, this letter A makes the sound A, and this letter A makes the sound A. And they memorize 1, 2, 3 rules, and then they start reading, and they apply those rules, and the rules don't work. And what happens is the child's not able to say, oh, well, this is just a different situation, and so the rule doesn't. What the child thinks is, I don't understand how to read. That's what happens to the child. The child says, I'm not good at reading. I'm not good at writing. I don't understand this because I thought I learned the rule, but the rule doesn't work. Everyone's telling me that this is really simple, so I must just be stupid and not understand how. And that's what happens to kids when they learn fake rules and then find that those rules don't work. And let me give you an obvious example. Imagine being a kid and having to grow up and learn some rules. Like, let's take a few words here in English. So here we have 4 words. All 4 of them have the same group of letters. And every word has a completely different pronunciation. Rough, dough, through, cough. 4 different words, 4 different pronunciations, with the same groups of letters. This is what I mean when I say English is not a phonetic language, and trying to oversimplify it for the kids, may get them started and may allow you to play around with some phonics lessons, but ultimately it's going to lead to more confusion. What I do with the kids is start them with classical Latin pronunciation, which is very simple. We simply learn that there are 5 classical vowel sounds, and the reason why we do this is because classical Latin actually was a phonetic language. So in classical Latin, when you learn the sound of this letter, that's the sound of the letter everywhere. And when you learn the sound of the consonants, when you learn the sound of each consonant, that was its sound everywhere you ever would see it. Classical Latin, like classical Greek, is a phonetic language. So phonics actually is a wise way to teach children to read and write in classical Latin. But in English is not a phonetic language, and so it allows you to get some fake elementary school work started, but if you don't have a way of dealing with the complexity of the language, you're just going to have kids who don't learn to read or spell. And so what we do in the CLAA, what I do in the Petty School reading program, is I start the kids with simple phonics instruction, but it's phonics instruction that's actually true. It's true phonics. In classical Latin, these letters do always make the sounds a, e, o, u. In classical Latin, these consonants do always make these sounds. B, k, d, f, g, h. In classical Latin, the phonics lessons are true. Whether you're a 5-year-old or a 55-year-old, that's what the lessons, that's how the letters are read, and that's how the sounds are written. There's only one way, okay? It's true in classical Latin. It would also be true if I taught the kids classical Greek letters and their sounds. It's a true phonetic language. English is not. And so what we're going to do is start the kids by learning classical Latin sounds, and then I'm going to show them how to actually read some classical Latin words. For example, once we get through the alphabet like this, I can write a word on the board, show them it's made up of 2 syllables, and ask them how to read that word. And when they say Roma, it's actually true. That's right. This is how you read it. It's very simple phonics in classical Latin. I can put up another one. If they learn the sounds of each letter, remember from lesson 2 in Petty School reading, we learned that the letter A makes the sound A, and the letter E makes the sound E. Well, the word in Latin is pater, pater. It actually, the phonics are true. It actually works. There's no changing of sounds or letters. And so the kids can start by learning to read some words from classical Latin, and by the time we go through the alphabet, they can actually read any word in classical Latin. It's not fake phonics lessons. It's real. Then what we learn after we go through the whole alphabet with classical Latin pronunciation, we learn the changes of ecclesiastical Latin. So for example, the kids learn that there are some changes. Just to make this real simple, this is all there is to learn. They learn that in ecclesiastical Latin, which develops later, instead of saying ke, the sound of this consonant changes to che. Instead of saying ki, the sound changes to chi. Instead of saying ge, it changes to je. And instead of gi, it's ji. Okay, so they learn a couple of changes that take place historically. And then they can read words that they may see using these real phonics lessons. So once they learn the ecclesiastical Latin changes, they now understand why the English word is read gem and not gem. This is based on the sounds of ecclesiastical Latin. When G is followed by the sound E, the sound changes from G to J, like in the word gem. Or if they go to violin class and they see a cello, they'll understand why it's pronounced cello and not cello. All right? Because they simply learn that there are some changes that come with ecclesiastical Latin. And then we go on studying through the course, and we learn more sounds that develop over time. For example, we learn that the C takes on the sound of an S. There are really not many changes, and we just focus on the changes. We learn new vowel sounds, like what we call the short English A, which actually comes from Older English. It's a sound A that comes from Older English and is brought into modern English. So they learn that the vowel A has the classical pronunciation A, but then it also develops this Old or Middle English sound A, and words that come from Old and Middle English use this pronunciation. And we just help them to understand that historically by going through the development of the language. And we do it, it's very simple as we go through it. So what I want you to see when we get started in the beginning of the course and the kids are learning classical sounds, we're not doing something weird. You know, it's not like I don't understand what the sounds are in English. It's that we're leading the kids in petty school reading through the historical development of the English language in a way that's simple, that they can understand. And later on, when they run into a word that they misspell. So for example, if a kid, take the word cello like I just used, if a kid tried to write the word cello and spelled it like this and got this marked wrong, we can explain to that student why that's wrong, because even though this is a good idea, phonetically this makes sense. Phonetically this makes sense. The problem with this is that cello is an Italian word, and so it actually uses ecclesiastical Latin in its spelling, and that C followed by E makes the sound ch, and you don't need to add the H. So a student who goes through the history of the development of English can understand what's going on here. They can understand how spelling gets more complicated because different languages are all sort of running together like different rivers into one lake. They can understand why there are these differences, and they know to think about them. They're conscious of the differences. So if I ask a student to spell a word, they're going to realize that you don't just start sounding out the word. You have to ask some questions about the word. If you watch a spelling bee, and I mean a higher level spelling bee, you'll notice that the kids in the spelling bee will often ask about the origins of the words. Because once they know that this word is derived from French or this word is derived from Greek, they can think through the complexity of the spellings and the options available to them and choose the most probable spellings. And that's our goal in teaching reading, writing, and spelling. We can't teach the kids how to spell every single word. We can't teach the kids how to read every single word. You and I have difficult times sometimes reading and spelling words because English is very complicated, and you have to know all of this etymology or historical development of words to ever be able to know how those words should be spelled. My approach to this is not to start kids with fake rules, because what I believe is that fake rules ultimately lead a lot of kids to confusion because they feel like the rules don't work. And so what they do is they assume, because their teachers and their parents are acting like everything makes sense, and the kids are having this internal confusion where they feel like it doesn't make sense, instead of calling all the adults wrong and the adults, admitting that, well, yeah, you're actually right. What we're saying is overly simplifying things, and we are kind of lying about what these rules are. Instead of doing that, the kids just assume that they don't understand things, that they're stupid, that they're not good at spelling, and we get that kind of language from the kids when the problem actually is the way that they're being taught the English language. The English language is not a phonetic language. It's not good for us to oversimplify it for the kids, but to find a way to slowly introduce them to the historical development of the English language over time. And we can do that. The way we do it in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is, first of all, starting them in this petty school reading course where we introduce these ideas to them and help them to see that English actually is confusing. And if you don't know how to spell a word, it's not because you're stupid. It's because it's a complicated language that comes from lots of different sources. And sometimes the only way to know how to spell a word is to look it up in a dictionary. And that's true for adults. That's true for me, a teacher of the classical liberal arts. There are words that if I hear a word, I may not know how that word is spelled. I can take a good guess, probably better than most people because of my knowledge of the languages, but I use the dictionary probably more than anyone because I understand that the language is complicated and it's just good to look words up. But for kids, we want to introduce them to these concepts. We want them to understand that English is a historically developed language. It's not phonetic, it's very complex, and it's difficult to spell. There are ways that you can learn to spell it correctly or to make good guesses, but ultimately you're going to need to use a dictionary, and we want to make sure we don't confuse kids with fake rules that are not helping them. And we have to resist the temptation to try to make our kids appear to be learning things that they're not actually learning, because that just shallow, maybe prideful eagerness to get little kids doing things leaves a lot of homeschool kids in a real mess. And not just homeschool kids, school kids as well. It leaves a lot of kids in a real mess when the fake rules and the fake exercises and the fake spelling workbooks and things like that stop, and the kids are left unable to spell or read or write because the way that they were taught did not prepare them to understand and use the English language. So when the kids are done with petty school reading, they have classical Greek and Latin grammar studies ahead of them in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, where they'll learn all these things in greater and greater detail as they learn Greek and Latin vocabulary, they learn where English words come from, and things like that. That's how you develop a real mastery of the English language. There's no shortcut, there's no easy way, there's no trick, there's no, little printout of the rules of spelling that you can put on a refrigerator. It just doesn't work like that. And so the challenge is finding a way to introduce the kids to the real challenges of the English language, teach them rules that are true, that will work for their whole lives, and then give them time to go through the classical liberal arts and actually get an education that makes them masters of their own language. So that's what we're doing in the petty school reading lessons as you watch us. So don't get worried that a child is 7 years old, maybe getting a late start in reading, and he's learning that the letter I makes the sound E and the letter E makes the sound A. Don't worry about the confusion. As we go through these petty school reading lessons, we're going to clarify and explain how the language develops and where the sound comes from. And it's not going to be confusing for the children. What's far more confusing for the children, and what you should be concerned about as a parent, is your children learning fake rules from fake, shallow, K-12 English courses that teach them rules that don't work, that's what actually makes kids confused in the long run. So we've been through this petty school reading course. I know it's helped my own kids to learn to read and not be confused about the English language, and it will help your kids as well. You just have to understand what we're doing. Be patient as we work through the whole course with the kids and they learn the whole development of the language that we're teaching them, and then see how it continues to develop as they move on into classical grammar studies, English grammar studies, and so on in years to come. So I hope that's a helpful introduction to petty school reading, what we're doing, why we do it, and how it's built in as a part of the whole classical liberal arts curriculum in the CLAA. If you have any questions about these kinds of things, don't hesitate to ask. I'm happy to talk about all of these pedagogical issues or linguistic issues. It's a real interest of mine. It's how I got into classical studies in the first place. So if you have questions, or if you have a child struggling with certain concepts or even pronunciation, things like that, you have questions like that, ask me, because I can help you by explaining things from this historical perspective, even down to helping kids overcome speech problems because they just don't understand how their speech organs work because they're not being taught good orthography. So if there's anything I can help with, please get in touch. Getting these kids started is important. Protecting them from confusion and never allowing them to use that language, the I'm stupid, I don't get it, I'm not a good writer, I'm not a good speller. Don't let that language develop. If your kids are saying things like that, something's wrong and it needs to be fixed before the problem it really discourages them and makes them turn away from learning by thinking that they're just not good at it. There's no such thing. These are arts. They're meant to be studied and practiced. They can be mastered by anyone, but the teaching has to be good to avoid that confusion. So I'm sorry if that's wordy. I hope that's a helpful introduction. I just wanted to throw that in here as I got started making these petty school videos because I know parents sometimes ask those questions and get concerned. You have to be patient and work through the whole course and you'll see how things work. I hope that's helpful. God bless.